All right, so today we're diving into a story that's pretty disturbing, actually.
Yeah, definitely a tough one.
We're talking about Nigeria, where you have these kids
Yeah.
protesting the rising cost of living, and they're facing some really serious charges,
I mean, incredibly serious.
possibly even the death penalty.
Yeah, and I've been, following this case for a while,
Right.
and it's not just an isolated incident, right?
Yeah,
This really speaks to some much bigger issues in Nigeria.
it does. So let's get into the specifics here.
Okay.
So we have these 76 protesters, and a lot of them are kids, right?
A good chunk. Yeah, 29 of them are between 14 and 17 years old.
Wow, and what were they charged with?
So they're facing charges like treason and mutiny.
Whoa, okay, wait, hold on.
Yeah.
For our listener who might not be super familiar with these legal terms,
Right.
when we say treason, we're talking about betraying your country.
Right, exactly. Often it involves actions that could threaten the government.
Okay, and mutiny.
Mutiny is like a rebellion against authority, usually within the military.
So you're telling me that these kids protesting high prices are being accused of trying to overthrow the government?
Yeah, that's essentially what these charges are suggesting, and it feels incredibly disproportionate to their actions.
I mean, intense is an understatement.
For sure. And here's the thing. Even though Nigeria hasn't carried out an execution since 2016,
Right.
the death penalty is still on the books.
Oh, wow.
So even though it's a remote possibility, it's still a possibility.
Yeah, that's a lot to have hanging over your head, especially when you're a teenager.
Absolutely. And it gets even more complicated legally because Nigeria has this Child Rights Act.
Okay.
And it specifically says that children can't be subjected to criminal proceedings
Right.
or given the death penalty.
Obviously, right.
So bringing these kids to a federal high court seems to go against that law,
Yeah, that's a direct contradiction, isn't it?
unless the government can prove that all of them are over 19, which seems unlikely.
And on top of all this, the reports about how these kids have been treated are just awful.
Oh, it's heartbreaking.
I read that 4 of them collapsed in court from exhaustion.
Oh my gosh.
Their lawyer, Marshall Obubakar, has been pretty vocal about the conditions they faced, claiming they were held for 90 days without food.
Wow.
I mean, his words really struck me. He said, "A country that has a duty to educate its children will decide to punish those children."
Yeah, it really highlights the feeling of injustice surrounding this whole case.
It does, it really does.
And, even though the court has granted bail,
That's good.
yeah, but the conditions are so strict that they haven't been able to meet them.
Really?
So they're stuck in this really difficult legal limbo.
Wow, so these kids are facing incredibly serious charges.
Yeah.
Their treatment has been questionable at best.
Definitely.
And it all stems from protests against the rising cost of living in Nigeria.
That's right.
So let's shift gears a bit and talk about the root cause here.
Okay.
The economic crisis in Nigeria. You've been following this closely.
It's a fascinating situation, albeit a very difficult one.
Absolutely.
Nigeria is a major oil producer, right?
Right.
But it's also riddled with poverty and inequality.
Yeah, that seems counterintuitive.
It really is. It's like this paradox.
Yeah.
The wealth from oil just hasn't trickled down to most people.
And to make matters worse, the UN just classified Nigeria as a hotspot of very high concern for food insecurity.
Exact.
So a huge number of people are struggling to get enough to eat.
It's a dire situation, and it creates this stark contrast, right?
Yeah.
You have politicians and lawmakers living lavish lifestyles.
Oh yeah, they're some of the highest paid officials in Africa, aren't they?
They are. It's crazy. Yeah, and then you have this huge segment of the population struggling to afford basic necessities.
So these protests are a symptom of a much deeper problem.
Exactly. They're a cry for change, for better opportunities for jobs.
And for a government that actually cares about its people.
Exactly.
So we're talking about children facing incredibly serious charges for protesting against a system that seems to be failing them.
It's a powerful image, and it raises a lot of questions.
It does. Like, what does this say about the state of democracy in Nigeria?
That's a big one.
And what about human rights?
Absolutely.
This case goes way beyond the immediate legal drama.
It really does. It forces us to think about the bigger picture.
And I guess it also begs the question,
Yeah.
what happens next? What will the government do?
Right. Will they address the root causes of these protests?
Will the international community step in?
These are all things we'll have to watch unfold.
Absolutely. And for our listeners out there, I encourage you to keep an eye on the situation because what happens in Nigeria has implications for all of us.
I agree. This is a story that deserves our attention.
It really does.
and our action, potentially.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's a call for us to think about our own role in supporting human rights and holding those in power accountable.
That's a great point to end on.
Yeah.
Thanks so much for joining us today.
It's been my pleasure.
And to our listeners, we'll see you next time on The Deep Dive.
Take care, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.